Environmental justice groups have called on South Africa to meet the lower bound of its new climate target range by accelerating the coal phase-out and renewable energy build, and to lead on demanding increased financial support from wealthy nations for adaptation and loss and damage to the United Nations Climate Change Conference. That's COP26 being held later on this month in Glasgow in the UK. Climate Change Conference is held annually in different countries and brings together governments that have signed the UN Framework Convention of Climate Change to discuss how to jointly address climate change and reduce global greenhouse gas. Well, to talk about South Africa's position in terms of its climate change targets and the COP26 agenda, we have got the Minister with us, the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, Barbara Creecy. Wonderful to have you. Thanks for being on the show.
Good morning, Deanne, and greetings to all your viewers. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Minister, you recently led the ministerial South African government delegation in a meeting with climate envoys that basically included representatives from countries like the UK, France, Germany, the US, all ahead of COP26. What came out of these discussions?
Yeah, these discussions were exploratory in nature, and essentially what we were exploring is how we can accelerate decarbonization of our economy, particularly of our energy supply, and also, of course, in due course, of our transport sector and other major emitting sectors of our economy. And as you said in your intro, there is a lot of pressure on our country from our own citizens, but also, I think, from all citizens in the world who are concerned about climate change, to speed up reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah. Where we get to as a country on our new range of our own country's contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions really depends on the extent to which we receive support from the multilateral environment. This support can be in the form of donor funding, it can be in the form of concessionary financing, and of course private sector investment. But it's very important for our country, Leanne, because at the moment 90% of our energy generation is dependent on coal-fired power stations, and we would need to be changing our energy mix, changing our transport modes and so on over the next 10 years, so that we can meet these greenhouse gas emission targets.
Yeah, can we meet that though? Is it viable for our country and for the economy, and not in an environmental way, but in a financial way? Because sometimes we do find that these methods are quite expensive, and can we afford to go in this direction now?
Well, Leanne, I suppose what we've got to understand when we look at climate change is that there is the physical risk, and that, of course, it's all about what's happening with our temperatures and extreme weather and so on and so on. But equally important is the economic risk that our country faces. What we're seeing is that most of our major trading partners are moving towards a net zero by 2050 commitment. And what this means is that increasingly consumers, governments, and financial institutions are moving away from coal-fired generation and moving towards protecting the investments that they themselves are making in renewables. And already there's the threat looming on the horizon of carbon border tariffs. There's the threat of disinvestment from fossil fuel industries. And for a country like ours that is very dependent on foreign exchange from our mining sector, from our automobile manufacturing sector, from our agricultural sector, all of which have coal-fired energy as an input, it's very important that we start to look at how we can transition so that our goods and services remain competitive in the international domain.
Yeah.
So there are risks and opportunities, is what I'm saying here.
Yeah, I can understand that. And it is, because, you look at the likes of, the US previously refusing to sign these agreements because they wanted to build the economy. They wanted to carry on doing what they could to create jobs and do all of these things. But I'm understanding what you're saying. It's now at a point where, governments don't want to do business with people that are not doing the green energy route. But when it comes to job creation within the country, going anything other than a coal route, again, I just asked that question, just it is again growing the economy, creating jobs versus satisfying the rest of the world. Help me here.
No, I don't think that it's an either or. First of all, I think that what we're seeing across the world is that there are considerable opportunities for economic growth and job creation in the new green industries. And across the world, this, together with IT, is the one area where there is growth and job creation.
Yeah.
But I think the other side is that we have to transition at a pace that our country can afford. And obviously, we will only be able to afford to move at a faster pace if, as we explained to the envoys when we met 2 weeks ago, there is considerable international investment and support for the transition that we want to make.
Yeah. So, let's look at the realities of climate change now and look at the adverse effects. It has an impact on food security, obviously due to extreme weather patterns, including drought and pollution. So when we look at this and we see what government is saying, do you have a clear plan on how to mitigate these changes?
Dan, you will recall that in February, President Ramaphosa set up the Climate Commission, the Presidential Climate Commission, and that brings together business, organized labor, civil society, government, to research and identify pathways for what we're calling a just transition. Because I think in addition to the issues we've already been discussing, one of the things we've been saying is that workers in vulnerable industries, and that would include workers in the coal value chain, in the auto chain, as well as all of those involved in agriculture, subsistence agriculture, must not be left behind with the changes that are going to be taking place. So we are doing significant research. We are bringing together all aspects of civil society and government so that we can agree on pathways that are sustainable for our country, that will indeed create jobs, and will have a particular and specific program for workers who are in the coal value chain so that they are not dumped on the street. And these towns where the coal-fired power stations exist in Mpumalanga do not become ghost towns. And this aspect of climate justice is a very central plank of the work that we are all doing.
Yeah. In 2009, we remember that developed countries more advanced economies made a promise to developed countries to mobilize $100 billion per year by 2020 to support climate action in these countries. Has that promise been kept by them?
No, Leanne, it hasn't.
Yeah.
And I think that South Africa, when we go to the climate conference, we're not working alone.
Yeah.
We work with what we call the African Group of Negotiators that represent negotiators of the whole of our continent. Our negotiators obviously have contact with other vulnerable countries and other developing countries across the globe. And I think developed countries as a whole are saying to the developing countries are saying to the developed countries, you have to honor your historical financial commitments. You also have to put up realistic amounts of money for the post-2025 situation. The OECD are saying that it's going to cost somewhere in the region of $3 to $4 trillion US for developing countries to adapt and to deal with the impacts of climate change on their societies and also on their economies.
Yeah.
So this investment is a very serious need, and without it, I think that one of the reasons why the Madrid talks broke down in 2019 was that there was this trust deficit between developing countries, and only significant financial commitment can re-establish this trust and take the negotiations forward.
Yeah. Just finally, as I wrap up, obviously there is an agenda. This is one of the issues on the agenda, but there must be many more that South Africa is taking to COP26. So let's find out what you are ultimately hoping to achieve there.
Well, finance, I think, is the big issue, as you say. The second issue is that we want a proper work program under the Paris Agreement on adaptation. So what we would all understand is that climate change is a reality in every country across the globe, and we now need a proper work program to address that. We need a proper institution to deal with the question of loss and damage. We have seen on our own continent, a city like Beira was wiped out in one tropical cyclone. There are many cities across the world in developing countries that have faced similar challenges. Where is the support for these countries to re-establish their infrastructure and to climate-proof their infrastructure? Carbon markets, the carbon trading is a very important part of the conclusion of the Paris rulebook, and we want to make sure that these carbon markets are set up in a way that is transparent and accountable, and also results in a flow of finances for adaptation. And then I think there's other technical issues like common time frames, common reporting formats, transparency, so that when countries say that they are contributing towards reducing greenhouse gases, we're using a common mechanism to count that reduction and common time frames around which all of us have to submit our information.
Minister, we'll leave it there for this morning. Good luck. Thanks so much for talking to us, and we certainly will catch up with you to see perhaps before or after, just to see how it all went. But that was the Minister giving us a bit of an outline as to what to expect from COP26. Barbara Creecy, she's obviously in charge of forestry, fisheries and environment. COP26 coming up, and that is going to be held in Glasgow in the United Kingdom later on this month.